Blog Talk Radio.
There's some dangerous, large carnivore out there.
And I saw that bird pick a young deer off the road and fly away.
And it was just about getting dark, and we started panicking, running down this ridge, not really having any clue what was throwing rocks in our vicinity, good-sized rocks. And I stopped long enough to get a 357 out of my backpack and look back, and that's when I saw it. I saw one.
For a week, the town of Defiance was being harassed by a werewolf. And it's actually attacked two railroad workers, killed livestock, just a lot of weird stuff that was going on.
Good Sunday evening, Monster Xers. This is your host, Gunnar Monson, also the founder of Sasquatch Coffee. You can check us out at www.squatchcoffee.com. Sasquatch Coffee, have you tried it? Yeti. With me always is my good friend and co-host, Shane Hardcore Corson. How are you, Shane?
Yo, Gunnar.
How was your weekend, buddy?
Fantastic weekend. Planning, gearing up for this show with Trent. I'm really looking forward to it. But I had a great weekend and looking forward to the show.
And I understand you had a birthday.
I did. I had a birthday and I got to celebrate it. Well, you were there. Got to celebrate it with some great people. Really had a great time with fellow friends and Bigfooters. Cliff Rackman had an appearance, so that was nice of him to show up.
Yeah, it was a good time. So it was a good way to spend a Friday evening. So I'd like to welcome we have a couple of new members to the Monster X family team. Loriana and Julie have joined us as admins and are helping us out with promoting the show and posting in the group and all kinds of stuff. So welcome aboard to Julie and Loriana. So, should be an interesting show. I watched Trent's episode earlier this week, and so some ways I'm more familiar with Trent than a lot of friends. I've seen him naked, so. But it was an interesting show. He's has the distinction of having been gone solo on the show for the longest stretch of time. After 3 days, his partner. I don't know how many people are familiar with the show, but basically the concept, it's a guy and a gal, and they have not met before, and they go out, and it's basically a survival. You bring each person brings one item with them, and you're naked, and it's a survivalist show. So they get together and have to make it through a 21-day stretch out in the wild. So I enjoyed.
Yeah.
I to be honest with you, I had not watched the show. I've seen pieces of it before, but Trent was the first full episode that I sat down and watched, and it was riveting. So I mean, it was interesting stuff that, you know, I don't know, that'd be an interesting experience to be out there naked and it would be spooky, especially if you end up by yourself, you know. And I said Trent made it all the way through and for 18 days all by himself. So
yeah,
pretty interesting.
Pretty interesting, and it was interesting his choice of item, or the item he chose to bring out there. You know, that was classic look by his partner, the female. You know, she brought like the hatchet, and he brought, you know.
Yeah, he brought a hammock.
A hammock.
So, but if you watch the show, you'll see that it actually turned out to be kind of a handy thing to have. So. I think she actually bought flint, so they were actually able to start a fire.
Oh, right, correct, yeah.
Yeah, and this particular episode was in the jungles of Belize, so and he had all kinds of stuff. He had crazy weather and had something that was visiting him at night. So I'm ready to talk to Trent and see how he made it through, and he also besides that, I almost forgot. Besides being on Naked and Afraid and having the distinction of going solo the longest, Trent actually has a Bigfoot story he's going to share with us. So from childhood. So I'm excited to hear about that too.
Yes, indeed.
And if you are ready, I am ready to talk to Mr. Trent Nielsen.
Yeah, let's bring him on.
All right. Good evening, Trent.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. Happy to be here.
Oh, thanks for joining us.
So, Trent, tell us a little bit of your background and stuff. How did you end up being naked and afraid?
That's a great story all in itself. It was one of those nights where it was about 2 a.m. and I'm trolling the computer because I couldn't sleep, and a pop-up came up and said, "Hey, do you want to be on this show?" It was an adventure show on the National Geographic Channel, and I thought, "Hey, why not?" So I applied, and then they called me the next day, and I was like, "Wow, that was quick." And I went through the casting, and they wanted to have me on their show, but then they canceled the show. And it was about a week after that the Discovery Channel called me, and I guess, I don't know, somebody threw my profile over to Discovery, and they called me and said, "Hey, we were looking at your profile, and Naked and Afraid is our show. You want to do it?" And I hurried and Googled Naked and Afraid, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool, yeah. I'm always up for a challenge. Why not? So it kind of evolved from that.
So they actually reached out to you and asked if you wanted to be on the show. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I thought it was cool because they told me they have like thousands of applications every month, and so I feel very fortunate that they did call me.
Well, excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat. But you had the distinction of being on there for the longest period of time by yourself. And what was that like? Because you go in expecting to have some company during those 21 days in the wilds of the jungles of Belize by yourself, and you end up, completely alone there.
Right. When they told me, they sent me an email and said your location is the Maya Mountains of Belize. It's way south in Belize, and so immediately I get on the internet and I start Googling Belize, attributes about Belize, and really the only thing I can find is it's the largest jaguar preserve on the planet.
Oh, great.
And so I'm thinking, I'm so glad I'm going to have a partner there, because if something happens, if I run faster than her, I'm okay. So I'm just kidding about that. But you try to prepare everything you can mentally and physically, walking around barefoot. But everything that you prepare is with a partner. And I'll tell you, in survival situation, another body there with you is your greatest survival tool, because survival, 99% mental, 1% everything else.
Yeah, you seem to have no problem at all. You were very supportive of your partner when she was, for the 3 days that she was there, and you could see a big change when your first night alone, and a lot of that you had a fear of the dark going into this.
Well, when I was about 10 years old, and I grew up in the mountains. Let me just get that out of the way. When I was 8 years old, my 10-year-old brother and I, we would go camping alone in the mountains. We had cougars outside our tents. We'd take guns with us, and my dad raised us kind of on the land, so we didn't grow up in the city and afraid of everything. There's not a lot that scares me, but when we were young, and we'll get into this a little later, I actually did have an experience that I'm not the biggest, baddest creature out there, and I have no night vision. So the dark, growing up in the mountains and having things walking around the tent, stalking me, yeah, I don't like that.
Of course not. Yeah, Trent, you also call yourself, you semi-survivalist. What does that mean exactly?
Well, I have a background of growing up in the mountains. We hunted everything. My dad was a big hunter, and we were always in the mountains doing something. And there's times we're stranded. We build snow caves, things like that. So I know the basics about survival. I've never gone into a survival situation where I didn't have an out, where there wasn't a truck and a gun a mile away. So, yeah, I grew up in the mountains, but to actually be in a situation, that's never happened to me.
Right. I mean, how do you prepare, being naked? I mean, how do you prepare for that? Did you do any preparation? Did you walk around your house naked or your backyard preparing for the show?
Yeah. My kids said, "Hey, Dad, we're going to dump out our Legos, and you just walk on them every day. Your feet will be fine." But physically to prepare for it, your feet, you're going to be on your feet every day doing something, and that's the best thing. Also, a month before I went out, I cut sugar, I cut caffeine, alcohol, anything like that, because I knew I was going to be out there almost a month, and it was going to be total organic and paleo. I may as well start getting my body in shape for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the show, it looked a lot like you didn't get a lot to eat.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're out there for 21 days, and they only have 42 minutes to air. There's actually an uncensored episode. My first meal was 6 days in, and tarantulas. You wouldn't think it, but they're fantastic to eat.
Yummy.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit, because I did read that you said that they had cut out a part where you're picking your tooth with a tarantula fang.
Yeah, it was actually, and if you watch the episode, I just got to give my disclaimer, #love handles or food storage. I bulked up before I went out because I knew that, food is scarce when you're out there naked, and hey, I'm naked. There's not going to be a lot of animals around. They probably scared everything. It was about a weekend, 6 days in, and I remember the producer says to me, he says, "Hey, Trent." I'm like, "Yeah?" He goes, "You hungry? Because you don't even act like you're hungry, and you haven't eaten one thing for 6 days. And honestly, you're so busy out there. People, you go camping, and you sit in your chairs, and you stoke the fire, and it's so comfortable. That's not the situation on Naked and Afraid. Because, number one, you can't let your fire go out. We're in Belize. It's soaking wet. If that fire goes out, it's ridiculous to start, even with fire starter. So about every hour, I have to restoke the fire night and day. So the most I ever sleep, 45 minutes maybe, and it's just go. It's seriously, it's just mentally go. But I hadn't eaten, and then he mentioned this, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, yeah, I really am hungry. And so all of a sudden, my alerts are not to collect firewood and reinforce the shelter, they're for food. And I find a snake. It was a coral snake, and in the Maya Mountains, there's a lot of ruins, and they're rocky, so you can't, with bare feet, obviously, you can't walk very fast on it. And the snake got away, and I was just like, oh, that would have been such a great meal. And I turned to leave, and I have my snake stick in one hand, and I have a machete in the other. And out of the corner of my eye, I see a big black thing. And I turn and look, and seriously, the size, I mean, it was massive. This jungle tarantula coming up out of the leaves. And I just kind of stuck it with a stick, and I looked up at the cameraman and said, I'm going to eat this. So they were like, oh, cool, and they get all in position. And I threw it on the fire. I charred it up really well, and I'm holding it in my hand, and the legs are kind of drooped over my fingers, and right behind the back of the head, the fire is just charred and cracked open, and you can see this bright white flaky meat, just kind of like a white fish. And so I grab a little bit, and I taste it, and I put it in my mouth. Tasted just like barbecue. And all of a sudden, all my glands let down, the saliva, and I just dug in, and I just started eating it. And, next thing I know, it's gone. And it was about a golf ball size chunk of meat. And you can see the back of the head. I don't mean to get too graphic, but and I just ate all the meat, and then I have it all in my teeth. And I'm looking at this spider, and it's seriously half-inch fangs. And so I just pop one of them out, perfect to clean my teeth out. It actually worked really well.
You got to do what you can do when you're out, when you're naked and afraid.
Exactly.
Trent, you guys got to bring items out there. Your item was a little bit different than what I consider, what most would bring out there. Why did you bring, what you did?
Well, on Naked and Afraid, not a lot of people know this, but they ask you to bring 4 items, and then the producer will choose 1 item. So I brought a machete, a big Bowie knife, and a couple of hammocks. And they chose the hammock for me, and I was so excited because cordage. You can do anything with cordage. And I knew if I didn't have a knife, there's materials. You can make things, spears, tools, things like that. But to have cordage for traps, the shelter I built, it had a great big garage hinge door, and it turned out great. But the producer did ask me, he says, hey, we're going to have you bring the hammock, but don't tell your partner right away what it's for. And it was honestly classic. When she saw that I brought a hammock, the look in her eye was like, you seriously, dude, what are you thinking? But it turned, we used every strand of that hammock, and it was a lifesaver in a lot of different situations. Yeah. Your shelter was pretty. I really liked your shelter. I thought it was well made and constructed, and with what was going on outside your tent or outside your sleeping arrangement at night, I thought you looked fairly safe and whatnot. But obviously, you felt otherwise at times. Yeah, and I built the shelter, and what they didn't show, it was a big A-frame. I could walk around in it, and I actually had a storage area to keep firewood dry, and then I built my bed right in front of the fireplace and built a shelter over that. So I actually had a shelter inside of my shelter. So I felt very secure. And the problem was that they didn't show on TV. When this thing would come up to the shelter, it was only after it rained. And my guess is it washed my scent away. So I would be laying there at night. It would start to rain. And I'm like, oh, I love the rain, but don't stop. Because it would end, and I would hear something down in the jungle crashing around. And honestly, I would hear trees falling over way down in the jungle. And I'm just like, oh, my gosh, here we go. And it would track back and forth. It didn't just walk up to the shelter. And again, I grew up in the mountains. I know predators, I know deer, I know elk, I know bear. This thing was running a perimeter around the shelter, and I sat there for about 40 minutes listening to it go back and forth, north and south, come close, go back far away. And it finally came right up to the shelter where I was laying on the shelter, where I was in the shelter, and it pushes on the shelter. I can hear it, and I can feel it push on the side wall of the shelter. And and when it did that, I smacked the side of the shelter with my machete, and I'm like, get out of here. And seriously, it just went crashing off through the jungle. Trees were falling down. And I'm totally exposed. Think about it. You don't have any clothes on. You don't have any shoes on. You're in a jungle. I've never been in the jungle. I don't know what sounds are out there. And you're,
right.
yeah. And my producer's like, "Well, you have a machete," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's 16 inches long. I have to be 16 inches away to defend myself." I mean, and it's pitch black. It's a little bit nerving.
Yeah.
So on the show, the sound. I mean, were the sounds that they played of whatever was outside I call it the Night Stalker, were those the actual sounds that it made, or were those put into the show as in after, the editing?
Well,
because it sounded like a cat.
Right. The first night that it happened, there weren't any sounds. You could hear it, and you could hear it tracking back and forth, and you could hear it come up and push on the shelter. And they put one sound mic outside of the shelter. Because they had an infrared camera. They have one on every episode. They put an infrared camera on one side of the shelter, but this was on the dark side. But they did have a sound mic, so it picked up all the sounds of the animal. Mm-hmm. And then when it went crashing in the jungle, they came up the next day and they listened to it, and they were like, "Holy cow!" And my producer says, he goes, "We know you're not lying because we heard everything." So they put up sound mics all over the place, and a lot of the sounds came maybe down in the jungle a little bit that they piped in for the episode. Mm-hmm. But all the sound mics picked up everything. Their cameras tried to get it. They tried so hard, but they have a scout on location with every episode, and the scout said, these animals, they can get around night vision. Because if you've ever looked at a night vision scope, where the light source is, it's really bright.
Right.
And he says they just walk around that. It's not a big deal for animals. So their cameras, they were having a hard time getting anything, but the sound mics picked up everything.
So you're out there, and what do you think that it was coming in? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I had studied all the animals in Belize. I mean, obviously there's jaguar. And the night of the big scare, I radioed down, and everybody ran up to my shelter in the middle of the night. And they did perimeters around the shelter and said, "We don't find any tracks. It's not a jaguar." And I'm like, I know it's not a jaguar. I never hear a jaguar coming. I know that. And then they thought it was maybe a tapir. A tapir is a jungle cow, and the scout says they weigh anywhere from 200 to 500 pounds. But the ground is always soft, no tracks. And so it baffled the crew. And they actually even considered having one of the scouts camp next to me because they were so worried about it, because they heard it, but there were no tracks. And it was about 2 weeks in, and the producer was talking to the scout, and he says, "Hey, did you find any tracks today?" And he's like, No tracks. And I'm like, all right, I got to say something. So I says to the producer, I says, "Hey, I've been walking around here for 2 weeks. You don't see my tracks." And he says, "Well, yeah, you walk upright and you're flat-footed." And I'm like, I know, right? And then there was just that awkward silence for about 30 seconds. And then he's like, "Oh, okay, I gotcha." And then he started Googling, legends of Belize and Sasquatch, Bigfoot, all that stuff. But it honestly was awkward because there was something big stalking the shelter, never found any tracks. And they set bait out for it. It would take the bait. They never ever saw it. Strangest thing.
Yeah, that is odd. So, but they do have stories of Bigfoot-like creatures in Belize. Is that what you're saying?
They do, actually. There's the El Duende, and it's supposed to be like a dwarf-like Bigfoot that attacks children, according to the legends. And then they have I think it's called the El Sesamite. I may be destroying that, but that's equivalent to the Western Hemisphere Sasquatch. And there are reports of it. There are, just like here in the U.S., in the Western states, there's reports in Belize too of the exact same thing.
That's very interesting. And I have to ask you this because I know this is probably run through some people's minds. Now, we're talking about a TV show, and producers and whatnot sometimes have different motives. Was there any way possible that they introduce somebody or some of these sounds to perhaps scare you and make a better TV show?
Good question, because I thought the exact same thing. And I told the producer, and every day when I'm up there, there's always a producer, a cameraman, and a sound guy. And they come up, and they come up about 8, 9, 10 in the morning, and they leave about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And then they go to their base camp or hotel or wherever they stay. In my situation, they were about 5 miles down the canyon. They were way far away, and they were staying at a farm. And I told my producer, I said, dude, seriously, if this is you guys messing with me, I will stab this machete through the shelter. And if it hits one of you guys, I will feel bad, but you know what? Too bad for you guys. And he looked at me right in the eye, and he says, Trent, do you know how lazy we are right now? Because our conditions aren't much better than yours, and there is no way we're hiking 5 miles up this canyon to mess with you at night. And like I said, they even considered having the scout camp next to me, because every morning, first thing, they would all rush up to my camp. They would grab all the sound equipment. They would listen to it, watch the videos. And the producer even said to me, he says, this kind of freaks us out. We don't really know what's going on here.
Mm-hmm. Was there any thought of pulling you out of that area or relocating you? I know you mentioned that on the show, I believe, about moving locations. Yeah,
unfortunately, the area I was at, because they scout out the locations, obviously, for numerous reasons of kind of where they want you to be. And the location that I was at, it was on top of a mountain. It was a big hill. But if I was to go anywhere, it was deep down in the canyons, in the canopy of the jungles, and it was wet. It was buggy. It wasn't very habitable to live. And so we didn't have a lot of options other than just keep me on the top of the mountain. And that's why they said, maybe we should have this guy camp next to you, just for safety purposes. But they monitored it very close. Obviously, a show like this, they don't they take a lot of safety precautions, because we are out in the wild. We're very exposed. And they put all the things in place to keep us safe that they can.
Right. Well, even with the little they do, kind of arrange ahead of time, you're still out there naked and trying to survive, getting water, shelter, food, fire, the whole nine. It's a pretty, and most of the guests they have on the show, because I've watched the show time and time again, some are, have a little bit more survival skills and whatnot, but you're thrown in these scenarios that are just at times unbelievable and totally foreign to yourself. What was the biggest hurdle you found out there? Was it the food, or was it when your partner left? What was the biggest hurdle for you?
Yeah, my biggest hurdle was water, and they don't show it very much, but they put me on top of a mountain, and on my map that they gave me, and honestly, guys, this show, when Discovery brought it forward, Naked and Afraid, Naked will draw people, but they wanted to create the most exposed reality show ever. And to take away your clothes, honestly, that is your number one shelter. And so that's where the Naked came from. And you're so exposed, shelter, water, fire, food, those are your basics. I could build a shelter. The water, on my map, it showed water on either side of me, but honestly, it was an hour hike one way just to get to water. And so and I require a lot of water. My radiator's broken. I'm always hot. So I drink a lot. And it was so hard because water, you have to hack through that jungle, and it's straight down off the mountain, and whatever goes down has to come back up. So water was my biggest hurdle.
And did you use you cut bamboo on the way in? Was that how you transported your water?
It was.
It looked like that.
And
yeah,
they canoed us up a river, and bamboo will only grow by water. And when I saw on the map that our location of where we were to go was at the top of a mountain, that's when I told my partner, I said, we've got to truck as much bamboo as we can up there because there's not going to be any bamboo up there. And so that's the hammock right away came into play because we created a hoist and just hauled seriously 100 pounds of bamboo straight up the mountain. And it was a lifesaver. It's what we built a shelter with. It's what we collected water in. I mean, I made a bow. They didn't really show it, but you could see it on my back when I was extracting. The bamboo was a lifesaver.
That's cool. So while you were there too, you experienced some weather. I mean, there was a period of time, like several days, where you couldn't even, at least on the show, it looked like you couldn't leave your shelter. Was that accurate, or?
Well, it was, yeah, and seriously, when weather comes in and you're in a rainforest, it's not like it rains. It's brutal rain, and it rains hard, and the winds come with it. There were a couple of nights I felt like my shelter was going to blow off the mountain, but honestly, that shelter was so awesome. And I would lay there on my cot, and I'd open that garage door, and I could just watch that canopy of the jungle and those storms roll in. And when they would hit, I would close that big door, and I would just lay there and just love the weather. I felt the shelter turned out really, really well, but the weather was brutal. Hurricane winds. It was, I mean, and that's scary too, because if your shelter's gone, and then you're even more exposed.
And so the whole premise of the story, I mean, your partner left 3 days in, and you made it the entire 21 days. And that was, of course, the longest stretch that anybody had done by themselves. Were you aware of that at the time, that you were on par to set a new precedent?
No, I didn't. Honestly, that thought wasn't in my head, because the raw aspect of it is, if I'm not warm at night, I'm dead. If I don't find food, I'm dead. If I don't drink, I'm hurting. If I don't have shelter. So the aspects of the things we think about when we're at home sitting on our couch, they're not in your mind when you're out there. All I could think of was, I've got to make this work. I promised my kids I wouldn't tap out. I have teenage kids, and when I left, they says, "Dad, would you ever consider tapping out?" You know, and as a dad, you want to be an example to your kids. And I said, no, there's no way I'll ever tap out. I will make it work. So I promised them. I promised my girlfriend. I promised myself. And I remember laying there thinking, I could tap out. But then I thought, what does that teach my kids? What does that teach me? So I go home and something gets hard, you just leave, you tap out. I'm not okay with that. When I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And I made it work, and it turned out really well.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, that's cool. Yeah. Go ahead, Trent.
Yeah, I guess the toughest thing out there, I would imagine, is your mental stability. Is a lot of it. I mean, 99% of it's probably mental. If you can get past that, then you got a good chance of completing the task at hand.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. It is. Most of it is mental, because I learned out there, if I could keep myself mentally strong, my body would do anything it needed to do. There were times when I thought, there's no way my body will keep up, but if my mind did it, my body would keep up. And at night, my girlfriend, she told me, she says, Trent, you have to be grateful for something at the end of the day, every day. And so at night, I would just, and there were nights when I'm like, I'm grateful that I didn't cut my foot. I'm grateful that I didn't die today. It was that silly. But just to have something to be grateful for to push you through. Because when we sit at home and we look at this and we think, why didn't they do that? Why didn't they do this? Oh, my gosh. Seriously, go out in your backyard tonight when it's midnight and sleep. You can have your clothes on. Just go sleep out there on the lawn. It's not that comfortable. Do you ever think about things you don't think about? It's so easy to judge what's going on, but when you're not eating, when you're not drinking, it would get in the 40s, and I remember just huddling by that fire and trying to stay warm at night, just waiting for the sun to come up. That's mentally exhausting.
Yeah, that's true for, when people are put in positions like that, I find that, and I've been in a few herring situations, not for like 21 days, but it is mental when you're in these scenarios, you got to really reel yourself in. And I like your idea of being thankful for something, every night. That's it's a good way to, keep yourself happy. It reminds me of the movie Castaway, where Tom Hanks, he had the beach ball, and that was his friend, and that kept his, some sanity and him grounded.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. We laugh at it, but when you're in that scenario, you have to keep positive. My partner, she there were things that she couldn't stay mentally positive, and it ate her up fast. And you saw how, if you've seen the episode, you see how fast it chews you up and spits you out if you're not mentally there.
Well, you seemed like a great person to be out there with, because you were so welcoming and encouraging. And I know that's a huge part of the survival out there.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, I have to give credit to my girlfriend, Sherry Joy. When I left, she told me, she says, you do, because, think about it. You're in a relationship. You're going to go out there and camp with a naked chick for 21 days. Is there honestly a girl on the planet that's going to be okay with that? But she told me, she looked me right in the eye and she says, Trent, you do whatever you have to do to keep her comfortable. She goes, I understand psychology. I understand the hierarchy of needs. You don't worry what happens. I trust you. Don't worry about how Discovery airs it. You take care of her, because she is your greatest survival asset. And I can't even tell you how comfortable that makes you feel going into a situation knowing this is a survival situation. We have to do what we have to do. Because there's past episodes where they fight and they bicker and it's miserable, right. And then one taps out and everybody, it's horrible.
Yeah.
Well, and if you entered the situation with the intention, no intention, you didn't give yourself the out of tapping out. So, and I think probably some people do go in thinking, if I don't like it, I'll just tap out, So kudos to you. Plus, you had the added challenge of having a pretty intense fear of the dark going in.
Yeah, that didn't help much. But and that's why I built the shelter like I did, honestly. I built a shelter inside the shelter because I'm like, if something's getting in, it's going to have to struggle to get in. I'm not going to get eaten that easy.
Well, how did that play out for you? Because it seemed like at the end of the episode, at the end of the 21 days, that you had worked through that quite a bit.
Yeah, I actually come to peace with it. And the last week, night would come, and it's the strangest thing. If you've never been to the jungle's beautiful, and the birds, and there were 50-something parrots that would land in the tree above me every night, and they would do their little chirps and squawking and all the birds, and I would lay on my cot and the fireplace was going, and I was on top of the mountain, and you'd see the sunset go down with that jungle canopy on the other side. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, people would pay bucks to be here and see this. And then that night would fall and the black would come, and I'd shut the door, and all the sounds would move from the trees to the ground. And they were sounds I've never heard before. And I don't know. I grew up in the mountains. I know what to listen for. Out there, totally different ball game. And I had no clue what the sounds were.
Right. What time did this, this thing that was circling your camp and whatnot, steer back a little bit. What time, what time would this thing come? Was it religiously come back to your camp at the same time, the same hour, or?
Yeah, good question. The first night it came that I noticed it was my first night alone after my partner had left. And it only came after it would rain. And I don't know if it's because it washed my scent off the mountain, but every few nights it would rain, and I would listen to that rain, and I would be like, I love the rain. Don't quit raining. Don't quit raining. And the rain would stop. And it was interesting because I would hear, down in the jungle, I would always hear a tree crash. Just after the rain quit, I would hear a tree way down in the jungle just crash. And then I would hear what sounded like, I don't even know how to explain it, like if you had 15, 20 billy goats and they were tap dancing on rocks, just this crackle on rocks down in the jungle. And then you could hear it because the jungle floor is covered with dry leaves. You could hear it walking, and then it would track back and forth. It never walked right up to the shelter. I would listen sometimes 30 to 45 minutes and you know when it's dark and you close your eyes and you listen to every sound, that's what it was like. And I would just listen to it track around the shelter and come up close and then go back and then come up closer and then go back and then come at a different angle. So it was like it was stalking the shelter. But it would only come after the rain. If it didn't rain, it never came to the shelter.
Yeah, you probably don't have an idea of time though. I was wondering if it was early morning, midnight.
Yeah, usually the rains would die off around midnight to 3 in the morning. So it was deep into the night. Usually between midnight to 3, 4 in the morning is when it would happen.
Yeah.
So that makes it even more. I mean, you're out there and you're trying to sleep, and knowing that, you know, when the rain stops, that you can expect a guest is. I mean, that's got to be a little like and especially given the fact that you had this fear of the dark, which I'd like to get into as where the fear of the dark came from. As you talk about, well, I mean, to me, one of the coolest things about Trent Nielsen on Naked and Afraid is Trent Nielsen has is the only person on Naked and Afraid that has claimed to have a Bigfoot encounter. So.
Yeah, the Bigfoot encounter, and when I did my casting with the Discovery Channel, they asked me, they says, tell us something that nobody else knows about you. And, you know, your mind's immediately rushing. What does nobody know about me? And honestly, when I was 10 years old, I had an encounter with Bigfoot. And ever since then, the dark, I don't have night vision. I don't have sharp claws. There's things out there that are bigger, stronger, and faster than me. And ever since that encounter was in 1980, I was 10 years old, I've never been outside without a weapon, a gun. I just don't do it because of what happened when I was 10 years old.
Well, let's talk about that encounter. Let's go back to the day that. So what happened? I mean, it affected you quite a bit. What was? Go ahead and describe the encounter for us.
So let me give you a little bit of preface to it first because it'll make a lot more sense. I grew up in the country, North Ogden, Utah, and there was a tight-knit neighborhood, and we were a couple miles outside of that neighborhood, and our house was on the side of the mountain, and we had a couple of neighbors, but not a lot. And for several weeks, there were reports every single night of seeing the Sasquatch, and something different happening. I'll tell you a couple of stories. But the thing about these encounters was when we would hear the stories, it wasn't just something you saw printed in the newspaper. It wasn't just a story you heard. They were people we knew. It was the guy on city council that knew everyone. It was one of the leaders in the local church. It was one of the neighbors that everybody respected. So when the reports would come out, it wasn't just a story. It was, wow, there's no way that guy would just make that up. We know that person. We know this family. And let me just share a couple of the stories that happened during that time with you, because it was, the whole community banded together. And it was the summer of 1980, and I have 3 brothers, 2 older, 1 younger, and we would sleep outside every night in the summers. When it was summer vacation, we didn't have school. But a couple of the stories leading up to this, that as the community got together and talked, there's a trout farm that was about a mile west of our home. And if you know what a trout farm is, they're big cement rectangle tanks. You walk up, you dip your line in, you pull out a fish, you go have them fillet it up and take it home. And we knew the owners of the trout farm. And one morning he walks into his trout farm and he comes to the first tank and he sees a couple of fish up on the bank. And there's bite marks out of them. And he's like, that's strange. Walks up into the farm a little bit more, notices a couple other tanks, there's a fish or 2. up on the bank. Some of them are broken in half. And bite marks like a human bite mark, not an animal where it just tears into it and digs out the protein. And he gets to his big main pond, and at the front of the pond, it's dirt, because that's where everybody stands, wears out the grass. 14-inch footprint. And then the ponds are about 9-10 feet deep, and you can see in the pond at the bottom where it had stepped into the pond and the moss had parted and walked across the pond and up into the trees on the other side. And the Utah Fish and Game actually have a plaster cast of that footprint today, and you can actually see it and view it and check it out. So that was just down from our house. We have my neighbors that were big hunters, and they're always scoping the hill. And they have their binoculars out one day, sitting in their lawn chairs, and they see what looks like a bear walking up the mountain. And bear are very rare around those parts. So they go get their big scopes, and they notice it's walking on hind legs up the mountain. So they go trucking on up after it, and this was right above our house. And they got within 20 yards of it 2 or 3 times, and they said it was a big, hairy creature walking on 2 legs. And they noticed, they says, we got so close, we could see that there was a lighter ring of hair around the center of its back, about shoulder blade level. And they followed it up 2 ridges, and then the thing just took off, and it was gone. One other story is our neighbors that lived across the street, they had moved down from Idaho, big potato state. They still owned a potato farm. And they would bring down 100-pound sacks of potatoes every year for all the neighbors. And I remember the neighbor says to my dad, he says, "Oh, I'm glad you got your potatoes." And my dad's like, actually, we went to get them because you said you left them out by the barn. They weren't there. He says, we never got them. He's like, really? That's strange. He goes, I had your name on the sack and everything. I can't imagine somebody would take it. But it was about a month later. I was in Scouts. We went hiking up the canyon, Coldwater Canyon to be exact. We're about 5-6 miles up the canyon. Well, guess what we found off the trail? 100-pound sack of potatoes with the name Nielson on it. And you could see the potatoes around the trail, and we all looked at it, and you could see what looked like bite marks right out of a bunch of the potatoes. So some had packed a 100-pound sack of potatoes up the canyon about 5-6 miles. So these stories are going on every night. I mean, every single night you're hearing a different story. And we wanted to sleep outside so bad. And like I said, we grew up in the mountains. We're not. I'm like, my dad's like, I don't want you sleeping outside. We're like, what? Come on. You believe in this Bigfoot stuff, whatever. Even though everybody's talking about it. And then my dad went out of town for business. And so us kids are like, pitch tents. We're sleeping outside. So my oldest brother and youngest brother, they were in a big 7-man dome tent. And then I was 10, my 12-year-old brother were in one of those little tiny triangle tents that you barely fit in. And it was about, I'd say 10:30 at night. And we have the flashlights on, we're playing cards. The kids in the other tent were asleep. And we hear something walking around the yard. And we know it's on 2 feet. We know what 4 feet are. We know what 2 feet are. So we flip off the lights, and we're just listening. And it comes up to the tents. You can hear it sniffing. Just starts circling the tents. You hear it go around the house, come back, circling the tents, sniffing around a little bit more, and then it leaves. And then we hear off in the distance what sounds like if you were to take a bunch of 2x4s and throw them on top of each other, it sounded like that sound, like wood being stacked on top of one another. And I remember I said to my brother, I go, oh, it's just a neighbor stacking his wood. And my brother said, he doesn't have any wood. And it was true. He was a big, eco-friendly. His entire roof was solar panels. He would never have a piece of lumber to save his life. And so we're just laying there listening. We throw the cards down, we lay down, and we're listening to every little sound. And it comes back to the tents. And about this time, this was the next day talking to my mom, she was inside the house, and my little sister wanted to sleep out in the tent. So my little sister had fallen asleep. My mom packs her up. She says she goes down the stairs to the front door to go outside, and this feeling of not afraid, but don't go outside, comes over her. She says, I'm standing there at the door with your little sister, and I just have this emotion of, do not go outside. Do not do it. But she didn't want to hear my sister complain, I guess, so she flips on the floodlights and opens the door. When she flips on the floodlights, we're on the side of the house, and the floodlights hit the tents. I'm on the dark side of the tent. The minute those lights come on, something lays down across the tent, buries my shoulder and my leg. I have to pull out of under it, and I roll over missionary style on top of my brother, and that whole side of the tent's collapsed in, hiding from the light. Seriously, you want a million thoughts going through your brain, but I knew if it's an animal, it's going to either stare at the light or it's going to bolt. If it's a human, it's not going to lay on some kid in a tent to yell. But I didn't yell. So there's a million thoughts going in my mind. What is going on? And then I'm like, oh, my gosh, is this creature all the neighbors been talking about in our yard? But it laid down on the tent, collapsed the entire tent in. My mom says she got to the first tent, the big dome tent. She says she was so scared, she zips the tent up, tosses my sister in, didn't even look to see where she landed or what bags were available, zips the tent down, runs back to the house, and locks the door. We're like, oh, thanks, Mom. We escape the clutches of the beast, and we die on the doorstep. But it was that scary to her. And then she flips the floodlights off, and it was about a minute and a half later, poof, the tent pops up, and it leaves. And we were like, we're not leaving this tent. We're not getting out. We were pretty freaked out at that point. So we laid there for hours, and then we finally dozed off. And the next morning we wake up. We zip up the tent. We peek out. We walk around to the back of the house. And this was back in the day when we had a big wood-burning stove, and we'd just been logging. And there were 100-pound logs that we had stacked behind the house with my dad. All those logs were all across the backyard, just all over the backyard. And what we determined was we had baby kittens that lived in the wood pile. And we figured whatever it was throwing these logs trying to get to the kittens. And then we go up in our pasture to our rabbit cages. And there are wood frame cages on 4-foot stilts with the chicken mesh wire. And they all have the hook and clip latches. Every single cage was secure. All the locks were done up, the hook locks. Every rabbit was gone, and there was blood in every cage. And about 15 minutes later, we found one of the rabbits behind the cages, and it didn't look like it was eaten. It looked like it had just been torn, just kind of ripped apart. Not any other animal, they dig in and they eat what they want and leave it. This one, there were no bite marks. It just looked like it had been torn up. So that was our experience. And in light of everything going on in the neighborhood, I didn't get a look at it, but the behavior of it, the smell of it, everything that comes along with it, wow, it just made a lot of sense.
So how long a period of time, you said there was all this activity in the neighborhood prior to, did it continue after that as well? And how long a period of time was that?
Yeah, it was about a month, and there were reports every night. And our incident happened right in the middle of it. But for a solid month, every single night, there were reports in the paper. There was somebody coming forward and saying, this happened, this is my experience. So there were a lot of different incidences happening.
And what other kind of incidents? So, I got a question. Did you ever see the kittens anymore after that?
Yeah, all the kittens were there. We dug through there and found them all. They were all there. So they were really tiny and elusive, so they got away. The rabbits, they weren't so lucky. Let me share one other incident with you. One of my best friends, he was playing church ball one night, and you have our house, and then about a mile west is the fish farm, and then about 2 more miles west is the church we went to. And he's playing church basketball one night, and it's time to leave, and so it's dusk time, kind of about that time where you should turn your headlights on or not, you don't really know. And he's coming home, and it's easier to cut up through the trout farm rather than go all the way around to the neighborhood. And the trout farm, it's wooded. You're on trails. He's pushing his BMX bike, and he was about 12, 13 at the time. And this is how he said it. He says, I'm pushing my bike up through the trail, and I get the feeling something's watching me. He says, so I stop, and I look in the trees. I don't see anything. He says, so I go a little further. And seriously, guys, I'm like getting goosebumps telling these stories right now. It really happened to us. And he says, I go a little further, and I just get this feeling something is watching me. We've all had the feeling.
Right.
He says, and so I stop, and I'm looking at the trees. And he says it was about 10 yards away from me, not very far, and all of a sudden he sees one of the trees sway, and it steps forward. And he says it was about 9, 10 feet tall, covered in hair, just sitting there watching him. And it took 2 steps towards him. And he dropped his bike. He ran the rest of the way home. When he got home, he was bawling, like just crying so hard. It took his parents 2 hours to calm him down before he could even tell his story of what happened. And they actually found footprints kind of in that area where he described where he actually had seen it. And that was the neat thing about that is there were so many people that actually visually saw the Bigfoot. And they just described it as a 9, 10-foot creature that stood on 2 legs, hair about 4 inches long, and just, I mean, these are people we knew. They weren't people that you didn't know. That was the thing about it.
So what was the town that you grew up in?
North Ogden, Utah. And the cul-de-sac, Coldwater Canyon, is where all the reports were. So if you Google it, you'll get a lot of the stories that come from that area. And I was just talking to there's a guy out here that he's pretty big into the Bigfoot. He's had experiences, his kids have had it. They research quite a bit, and he holds Bigfoot, I don't know if you want to call it conferences, but there's a couple hundred people that show up. And I was talking to his daughter the other day, and they says, oh my gosh, Trent, even today there's still, several times a year sightings and reports coming out in that same area. So,
yeah, this area, I mean, what's the draw there? Why would a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, really be in this area? Is there a lot of places to retreat back to? Is there a lot of water sources? A lot of, places for something this size to hide?
Oh, yeah, the Wasatch Mountains, they back to the Colorado Rockies. So my backyard, the next human interaction you're going to have is in Colorado. So from Utah to Colorado, it's all mountain range. So it's a vast wilderness of mountains. And the Fish and Game actually, at the time where we were on the other side of the valley, there were some more mountains, and there were a lot of reports. And they had actually thought that in their preliminary report that there was maybe a mother and a child Bigfoot that were separated, and they were running the mountain range looking for each other. And that's what the Fish and Game had reported that they thought maybe was happening.
Wow.
So obviously, when you're 10 years old, that's a pretty intense experience.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For most adults, that would be a life-changing experience.
Yeah, and I even pulled my. This was back in the day where your parents say, write a journal, have a journal, always write a journal. We hated writing our journals. I have like 6 entries from when I was a kid. But one of them is the day after that happened, and I have the entire experience recorded in my 10-year-old handwriting.
Well, that's fantastic. It's something you can go back to and share. Even down the road. I mean, this area, seems to have had quite a big activity. Why do you think? Saying that it is a Bigfoot or Sasquatch, why do you think it was there? I mean, was it there to? It doesn't sound like it ate the rabbits per se, but it was after the kittens possibly and the rabbits, and it obviously possibly took off with a bag of potatoes. I mean, this is all food sources possibly.
Right. And Yeah, I mean, all good questions that we are all wondering. I mean, we had 4 rabbits. We found 1. There was not a trace of the other 3. What it did with those, we don't know. And we were little rambunctious kids, so we scoured the mountainside everywhere for them, and we only found the 1. The area, there's a lot of places to hide. And it was actually 10 years later, we had some worldwide Bigfoot trackers show up on our door. And they said, we want to hear your story. Because when this happened, it was all over the news, and there were reporters. But it was 10 years later that they says, hey, we heard about the stories. We kind of want to talk to you and just get firsthand of what happened. And they had told us that 2 weeks prior they had found tracks again above our house. And that was 10 years later. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just all very intriguing and interesting, especially not just because you guys had a possible encounter, but it sounds like that, members of the area and the town had these encounters and sightings and stuff. I mean, it's pretty compelling stuff when you got one witness to something, but then when you start looking at the whole picture, you got something going on there. and I'm surprised, I mean, did you guys have were there people, wanting to gather up and go looking for this thing at the time?
Oh yeah, all the time. But obviously we all know the Bigfoot is so elusive. There would be bands of groups of people, if they would hear something, they would go scout it out. But honestly, the only time there was anything ever solid was spur of the moment, and the neighbors would be scoping the mountain and they'd see it, and their little group would run up after it, or somebody would hear something at night and they saw something in the backyard, and so they turned on the lights and they saw it run across the yard. And they would try to put little groups together to go search. And the search parties, every once in a while, they would hear the yells and the screams and things like that, but there were no sightings when it was a legitimate search party. It was just sporadic when people had their encounters. And like you said, it was amazing because the reports weren't somebody hiding behind a computer screen making up a story. They didn't even have an internet back then. It was all newspaper and word of mouth, and they were prestigious people in the community that would come forward and say, hey, you guys, this is serious. Let me tell you what happened last night. And it wasn't for hype. It wasn't for popularity. It was for awareness, saying, okay, we got a situation in the neighborhood. You guys need to be careful because here's what happened. Those were the type of stories coming out every night.
So, and the encounters, the majority of the encounters that people had take place at night?
A lot of them did, but there were day encounters. When they tracked it up above our house, it was the middle of the day. It was like 1, 2 in the afternoon. So a lot of the encounters were at night because somebody would hear something, and then they would go outside or flip on their lights, and they would see something in their backyard or see something in the neighborhood. But there were a lot of day encounters as well. My neighbors tracked him up the mountain in the middle of the day. Unfortunately, back then, there were no such thing as cell phones. It was all,
right,
the 40-millimeter cameras that you had to go and develop. So it wasn't like today where you can just pull out your phone and take a picture. So, but they saw them.
Well, we don't have that much good luck getting pictures now, even with all the cell phones and instant pictures. So,
hey, I think it's only a matter of time. There's so much, people have so much access to media and technology. I think it's only a matter of time before we get something really, really concrete.
So were there other stories where people's pets or livestock or something went missing, or evidence that they were in the area, that you lost your rabbits? What else kind of animal stories were there?
Yeah, there was. We had 3 neighbors by us, and one of the other stories is one of our neighbors. He says he heard something at night, and he had left his garage open. And so he says, I opened my front door, and I could just smell just a musty, foul smell. He says, and I looked, and he had it was kind of a rambler house, so he looks down his porch over to his garage, and he clicks his garage thing to close the garage, and whatever it was just went bolting out of his garage and up the mountain. But he had kittens, again, the kitten thing, he said he had kittens in his garage, and a couple of them were missing when he went in the garage to check on them. So it was going in there, and it had gone in there and taken a couple of the kittens, and he had heard it and came out and scared it off. So there were reports like that. Livestock, bigger animals, I don't have any stories really with that. It wasn't really a farming community. It was a neighborhood, and people had small animals, not really the big livestock.
Gotcha.
And so, Trent, your dad, you were talking about earlier about your dad. Your dad comes back, from his trip. Was he ticked off you were out there, and did he believe your story?
Oh, he's the one that had to put the logs back because we couldn't lift them. They were too heavy for us. And so right there, my dad was like, something that was really weird. And that's when he opened up the newspaper and started talking to the neighbors. And he said, dude, you guys are not sleeping out anymore. I'm your dad, and I'm making that decision. You're sleeping in the house from here on out. And because he knew us kids, the logs were huge. We hadn't cut them down yet, and they were just all over the backyard. So it gave a little credibility to us.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. Do you have any family still in that town? I mean, has there been any recent reports from this area?
I have a friend. Her name's Shelley, and she grew up in the town, and she's my age. And she actually came to my watch party when my Naked and Afraid episode aired. And she says to me, Trent, she goes, I hope, because I gave my whole story up there on the mountain to Discovery. It was unfortunate they didn't air any of it. They just put little blurbs about, I've touched Bigfoot. He laid on me. made me look like an idiot. But she says she just says, Trent, seriously, you need to get with my dad. Her dad is one of the ones that had several encounters with Bigfoot, and he was the go-to guy on the news. And she just says, Trent, the stories haven't stopped. She says, we need to get together. They just keep going and going and going. She says there's current sightings even in 2015 in the same area, and she still lives in the same area. So.
Wow. Yeah,
but unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to really sit down with her yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know there's some reports from that area in the BFRO database. If you're familiar with the BFRO, so the area it's known for activity. Living up here in the Pacific Northwest, we got our full plate of reports and encounters all the time. But I'm always interested to hear from other areas. I mean. Utah, when I think of Utah, I don't necessarily think Bigfoot, it takes, someone like yourself to come up forward with an encounter or a story or something for me to, get interested in an area. And
right.
You got quite a compelling and very interesting and rather hairy story with that night so many years ago.
Yeah, and in fact, since my episode aired, I've had a lot of people coming and saying, oh my gosh, Trent, we got to tell you about this. And they're all from the North Ogden area. So in the next month or so, I'm going to be meeting with quite a few people, and they're saying, I want to share a story with you that I had last year. I want to share a story that my kids had. Oh my gosh, there's still so much going on. So I'm kind of interested to learn kind of delve back into it a little bit. I got caught up in kids and marriage and corporate America and kind of did the thing, but now that I'm getting back to my community and since the episode aired, there's so many people coming out of the woodwork saying, oh my gosh, we have to talk. And these aren't people that are strangers. They're people that I grew up with or people's kids that I grew up with that say, my parents knew you. I want to tell you what happened to us. So it's kind of fun to hear all that.
Oh man, that's epic. It'd be really good if you could put some of this, pen to paper or get all these reports together, because this is like, there's, you got a lot of the famous stories out there, the folk monster, Arkansas, and all these different, historical reports of, where a town had something going on for an extended period of time. This sounds like this has potential to be something like that, and it'd be really cool to get all, these reports together and encounters, over a period of time, and just, for whatever. I don't know. I'd love to read it or see it, or sounds interesting, intriguing. And in fact, I know somebody that does films. They're really good, and they're documentary style. And this might be an avenue, I think, because I'd love to see it told in first person and whatnot. So.
Yeah, definitely. And my thought's the same. I want to, over the next month or two, to get as many stories as I want. In fact, I was in contact with the organizer of, gosh, I don't even know what to call it. Last time they did it was in 2011, but it was people that have had encounters in the area, in the immediate area, and anybody that wanted to come listen. And he just threw it out there, and 200 people showed up. And 60, 70 of them were people that had encounters. And I was just in contact with him this last week, his daughter anyway, and they're saying he's looking at putting something together again. So he's my next call to say, hey, let's get some of these stories together. And, this day and age where media is so accessible, let's put it together and create something that people can actually put their hands on and watch and listen to and look at.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, and that's a good avenue with using social media and stuff nowadays. You may even get more people coming forward with stuff. Maybe some of the outlying areas that people you didn't know, or whatnot. Maybe this is much broader than what it seemed at first.
Oh, exactly. I mean, since my episode aired and I said the word Bigfoot on it, I have people from my hometown community all the way to Florida right now calling me and saying, I want to share stories with you. I want to hear your story. I want you to hear mine. So it's actually generated quite a buzz of activity.
Yeah, it sounds like, the Naked and Afraid episode, you joining that show and doing so well and gotten you a lot of contacts. It's kind of brought some life to your encounter and opened some more doors. I'm excited about possibly what you got going on down the road. What else do you have going on down the road? I mean, is this an avenue is this something you're going to jump into? You got anything else going on?
Well, it's always been an interest, so we'll see how it develops. My girlfriend's a motivational speaker, so she's like, oh my gosh, let's use this episode and overcoming fears for speaking, and we're kind of running down that road as well. And we do like relationship retreats and things like that. So that it's actually jump started that. But with the Bigfoot, with the things like that, I mean, it's putting us in front of tons of people. And with my girlfriend speaking, everybody wants to hear about Naked and Afraid. Everybody wants to know about Bigfoot. And the minute that we start talking about it, people just start pouring out of the woodwork. And it's so much fun to see that, there's, the thing that amazes me is I'm in Belize. Think about it. 100, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, there's no internet, there's no express mail, there's no telephone, there's no telegraph, but yet we have Sasquatch sightings, we have drawings. You go 1,000 miles across the world, they have the exact same thing. So what 2,000 years ago, what did somebody say, all right, I'm going to spend my entire life traveling the world and tell people to think their stories?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Really? How can you have in Oregon and Utah these reports and sightings and drawings? You go halfway around the world 300 years ago when people didn't know each other because they didn't have internet, and they have the exact same stories and the exact same drawings. Seriously, think about things you don't think about.
So Trent, you started a Facebook page called Trent Nielsen Adventure Page. So, and I would encourage anybody who wants to follow Trent's adventures to go check it out on Facebook, Trent Nielsen Adventure Page, and give it a like. So, what are you hoping to, you're making contacts with Bigfooting? Had you, since your childhood and your encounter, had you thought about Bigfoot much, or you just kind of put it away, or?
No, I always did. I just didn't have the exposure I do now. That is something that happens. It never leaves you. It's always in the back of your mind. And I go camping a lot with the kids. There's never one time I've been in the mountains I haven't thought of that experience. So, but to bring it forward and actively talk about it, it's been quite a while since I've done that, but it's always been in the archive of my memory. And the adventure page, I created that just to track whatever avenue I decide to go down, and anything exciting that happens. The Bigfoot, it's so much fun to talk to people that have had encounters. It's so much fun to share my story and hear the similarities and different things that happen. And that's kind of what I created the page for, was to just share those experiences and different things, and people are welcome to post on there as well and share things. It's just, you know, there's something going on out there, and we don't know what it is exactly. Hopefully one day we will.
Absolutely. What about, what are your thoughts? What is a Sasquatch? Do you have any opinions on that? Is this some savage, you know, ape-like beast that's more man-like? I mean, obviously you haven't seen it, but you got any, with the people you've talked to and some of your experiences, you got any thoughts on what Sasquatch may or may not be?
Well, I have my opinions, and I have the opinions of those that taught me when I grew up, and I'm going to share both with you.
Awesome.
I'm from Utah. I grew up LDS, Mormon. And there's a Mormon book called The Miracle of Forgiveness. Page 127, it talks about there was a man, right, this was back in the 1800s sometime, the early church when it was being organized, the Mormon church. And it talks about a man riding on his mule. And it says a creature, I don't remember the exact verbiage it uses, it says, but I was approached with a man that was covered in hair that stood as tall as I sat on my mule. And I asked him who he was, and he said, I'm cursed to walk the earth. And so in the LDS religion, I mean, they don't have any exact stance on it, but they allude to maybe Cain from the Bible. But with our experience and the Fish and Game saying, you know, there's one over here, there's one over here, and we think they're separated, my thought is, it's as good a guess as anybody's. I 100% believe there's something out there. What it is, I don't know. I love to hear stories. I love to hear research, because to gain any more knowledge than what I have, I love that, because there is no doubt in my mind there's something out there. There's those experiences I had when I was a kid. You can't take those from me. And They were people that we trusted. They were people that were esteemed in the community. It wasn't stories that were made up. It wasn't something you just heard and thought, wonder who wrote that. We knew the people that were saying it. So there's no doubt in my mind there's something out there. What it is, honestly, I have no clue.
And that's an honest answer. I could appreciate that. You know, I could definitely appreciate that. But you also meant something pretty interesting about the Fish and Game. Are they still around? Because it's, you know, a lot of people say there's conspiracies with people hiding stuff. The government knows, the land development agencies know. Would you think, if they're still around, was there any official writing up on this with the Fish and Game? Would they speak of it?
I know they came out in conjunction with, I believe it was Weber State University, and again, don't quote me exact on this. I need to look it up and ask a few questions. But they're the ones that came out and did the plaster cast. And the Barkers, Jay Barker, he was the owner of the trout farm. I think the Fish and Game held the cast for a while, but then they turned it over to Jay Barker, and the owner of the trout farm is the one that actually has the plaster cast on display now. And the trout farm is still in existence in the exact same location. So they had it. They didn't try to hide it. They actually turned it back over to him and said, okay, we've done everything we can with it. It was on your property. You can actually have it now.
Gotcha. And he probably still has that in his possession, I would imagine.
Yeah. He's as far as I know, what I've been told, he still has it. I've actually been talking to some of his kids, and I'm going to head up there and get it and get some more accurate stories from them.
Awesome.
One of the things kind of interesting is because a lot of times when people have an encounter, they don't have anybody they can tell it to, and they're not comfortable. That's kind of unique, where your whole community was talking about it, so you didn't have you didn't have to like hold it inside. You were able to talk about what happened. So.
Well, that's it. And we not only didn't hold it inside, everybody was warning everybody what was going on. It was kind of a community watch program that the whole community banded together and said, okay, it was over here last night. Everybody be on the lookout. It was over here. This was happening over here. So it wasn't even. It didn't evolve to, oh my gosh, I have a good story. Listen to what I have. It was more, hey, you know what? This is going on over here. Keep your doors locked. This happened over here in the neighborhood in this guy's backyard. Watch out for this. So it was the whole community banding together saying, we don't know what it is. We keep seeing it. there's no way we could catch it or track it because it's too fast. But it was more the community banding together in holding each other's hands of what is going on in our community. We have to get through this together, rather than, oh my gosh, I have a good story. You want to hear what happened?
Yeah. Sounds like we need to get you on Naked and Afraid in search of Bigfoot.
Right? But not naked anymore. I want to
Yeah, trust me. I watched the episode, and I don't enjoy seeing people naked personally, but you handled it well, and it would be an interesting show to see you back out there again doing something else, because you're very charismatic.
Well, thank you. It was the most stupid, awesome thing I've ever done in my life.
I remember at the end of the set, you said, "I'm never taking my clothes off again."
Yeah, and the producer legitimately asked me. He says, "Would you ever do this again?" I said, "No." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I will never take my clothes off again." and then he says, "Poor Sherry, your girlfriend back home." So, but I've learned to shower without clothes on again. It took a while, but it was a great experience. Toughest experience of my life, but it was a great experience.
And like you said, something your kids can look back upon and be proud of their pops for committing to something and seeing it through.
Absolutely. We're only as good as what we say we are. I mean, everybody can talk big, but I'll tell you, true character comes in the darkest hours. If you want to see somebody's colors, put them through hell and see how they come out of it.
Well said.
Well, you were impressive on the show. It was fun to watch. So, and now I'm hooked. I'm going to be a Naked and Afraid fan from here on out. So,
hey, that's awesome. I'm glad we created a fan, because it's honestly the most realistic survival show out there right now. It's that a lot of people think that it's all made up and it's scripted. It's not. There's a camera crew, and your only goal is to not die, and they're there to document it. That's all. You know, sometimes it's Hollywood, and they'll paint it to look like a storyline or something exciting and dramatic. But hey, if you didn't give it to them, they can't dare it. And it's just you out there doing your thing, and they're filming it.
So the what's next for Trent Nielsen?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what's next for me. I don't know. Everything's up in the air. I am a sporadic guy. I'll jump at about anything, but something hard, fast on the horizon right now. I don't know. I haven't made any plans yet.
I think we should get you on a special guest episode of Finding Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Hey, there you go. That would be fun. Maybe on the episode we actually find him.
Zing.
Zing, yeah.
Hey, there's enough going on, honestly, guys. It's just a matter of time. We have technology. Everybody has it on them now. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, Trent. I do believe it's a matter of time. You know, Gunnar and I do this Blog Talk radio show, but we're active researchers in the field. If we're not out every week, we're out every 2 weeks doing our thing and collaborating with other researchers and groups. And not only is it fun, but I believe we're getting somewhere with a lot of the data we're collecting and whatnot. And I'm a believer in Bigfoot. I know they exist. What they are, I'm like you, I don't know. You know, I got my own opinions and ideas, but there's something out there, and what it is yet to be determined. But it is a matter of time, and people have been saying it for a long time. But I truly believe it is really a matter of time before this thing's proven to exist, and it'll be a good day, I believe. A lot of people don't want it proven, and I understand why. But until then, many of us will keep plugging away and talking to people like you, Trent, that have a fantastic story and a great background. And it's been very enlightening tonight talking to you. I've really enjoyed this conversation and everything you brought to the table, my friend.
Hey, well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate the format to speak openly about it as well. It's good to talk to people that understand what you're talking about. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Gunnar, I've been really enjoyed this show talking to Trent, and I'm really happy you joined us. What are your thoughts?
It's interesting the connection, of course, the Bigfoot story from his childhood, and it's even more compelling that there was all that activity in the neighborhood. That always is interesting to me, is what causes Bigfoot to when they seem pretty shy and stuff. There must have been some compelling reason for them to be making that much contact and going in and it sounds like they might have had a food shortage or they just were. It was a target of convenience or whatever. But
either way, something's going on.
It was pretty cool. But Trent, if you're ever out in Oregon and you want to go out looking for Bigfoot, give us a call. We're like Shane said, we're out in the woods really often, and we have had some really weird stuff happen. So.
Oh, I definitely will. I'm up in Portland, Oregon all the time because I have 2 stepkids that live up there, and we're always up there. So I'll get with you guys and let's go have some fun together.
Oh, definitely. We're both in that general area, so we'll definitely hook up and head out sometime. Even if nothing happens or whatnot, you'll get to see some beautiful scenery and enjoy some of the lesser known parts of Oregon.
Oh, I love the Northwest. I'm always down for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Trent, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was a lot of fun. I appreciate all your guys' insights and what you guys are doing out there too, because it's fun to follow people that follow this and hear all the different stories. And what's amazing to me is the similarities. You see stories of people that don't even have contact with each other, and their stories are a lot similar than you would think.
That sure lends a lot of validation to what people experience. So pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
You bet. Thanks, Trent.
Absolutely.
So Shane, that Trent Nielsen, again, folks, that was on. Just watch for his episode. Go check it out on Naked and Afraid. The guy really shored up after getting his counterpart split after 3 days, and Trent held on for the next 18 days by himself and managed to finish the challenge. So the guy's got some cojones, and dealt with the fact that because of his encounter when he was not real comfortable with the dark. So and he managed to work through that. So kudos to him, and it was great that we were able to get him on Monster X.
Yeah. Kudos to him. It takes a lot to do that sort of thing. First you have to have cojones to get out there naked, and then next 21 days away from your family and your social life with nothing. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I could do that easily." It's a lot tougher, especially when you're thrown in there you're not familiar with, like he said, the jungle. He's not familiar with the jungle. Throw him in the mountain, he'll do a lot better. But he made it through, and he was a fantastic guest tonight with some incredible stories, stuff that I'm actually going to follow up on because it's very intriguing to me with that area.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. That whole stuff going on in the neighborhood for a solid month, and everybody talking about it, which is pretty unusual. So pretty cool.
Absolutely.
And that's about all the time we have for this week's Monster X. I'd like to thank Trent Nielsen again from Naked and Afraid for joining us today and sharing his Bigfoot encounter. And thanks to you, Shane, for being here. And enjoy your week. We'll be back next week with another episode of Monster X Radio.